Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths. We hope you're joining us again, even though we scared the pants off of you last week. And we're back to do it again this week. But don't worry, after spooky season is over, we are back to our normal schedule of shows, and we've got some great subjects lined up for you. But we thought we would conclude spooky season with some really scary, spine-tingling stories that you can just snuggle up with a blanket and a fire as you listen to us and think about, I don't know, I think it's fun to scare ourselves sometimes. Do you?
I guess it depends on the degree of scared.
That's true. That's true. Well, Stephen King wrote a wonderful essay on why we need to be scared. And if anyone wants to look it up, it's called Why We Crave Horror Movies. And the whole point of his essay is that we push down all of our negative emotions all the time. We're always taught to not be angry and, not be afraid and be strong and be tough and be happy and be positive. And he says that our negative emotions get lost and we push them down. And what we repress tends to be like the alligator in the basement, I think he calls it, and it's always trying to get out. So he says that when we listen or read or watch scary stuff, it's a release for us.
See, I think that's really interesting because I can read this stuff. I can't, but I don't like to listen to it or see it on a movie or anything. I've read all of Stephen King's work. I've read other horror writers, and it doesn't impact me the same way.
I'm reading one of his newer books right now called Fairy Tale.
Okay.
It's so good. I have to actually work and, go out and do things, but I just want to sit and read this book. It's really good. It's about a shed in a backyard that's a portal to other worlds.
Ooh.
All right. Back to our topic this week of scary stories. Now, this first story was emailed to me years ago by a listener, but I've saved it. I've never forgotten it. I'm excited to share it with you, Denise, and get your thoughts on it. And this is what she wrote. The pre-Civil War home in New Oxford, Pennsylvania summoned us with an ulterior motive. You might not believe a house can possess an agenda, but this one conjured us with the sole purpose of rescuing a ghost. When we moved in, we noticed that while much of the house had been renovated, the attic was unchanged, and the bedroom connected to the steep attic staircase was also unaltered. This was the ghost bedroom and most inhospitable. The attic had stayed the same since the Battle of Gettysburg. It provided safety for the ghost, a sense of constancy. Our daughter's room was next to the haunted room. One night, I was awoken by a mournful cry emitting from the baby monitor, and when I ran to check, I found our little girl fast asleep. I returned to hear sobbing over the monitor and raced back to our sleeping girl. For any scoffers, no, the baby monitor was not picking up another child, and the house across the street was a funeral home. Oh, well, that's comforting. Upon listening intently, my husband and I decided it was an older girl, maybe about 7 years old. We would come to learn that this was Katie Elizabeth, the ghost girl, but not until our daughter would be old enough to tell us. In time, our daughter would point out details on the property and inform us of things her dear playmate and confidant Katie Elizabeth told her. That was where they kept the horse and buggy, or the bear claw bathtub was Katie Elizabeth's, and so on. Our daughter gave us historical tutorials like a tour guide. She'd point determinedly and knowingly tell us how things used to be. And it got weirder. Once at a restaurant in town, a waitress chatted with our daughter and asked her name, to which she responded, Katie Elizabeth. As a mother, I felt for this ghost child left behind, and I guess she sort of adopted us. Of course, I tried to guide her to the light, but she did not go. Our daughter never expressed fear of her playmate, though there was one time from her big toddler bed where she screamed that the sick boys were so rude because they never asked before playing with her toys. The sick boys apparently made her bedside table spin too. When we decided to move away, Katie Elizabeth was scared. She didn't want us to go. Our daughter was 5 years old by then, and their age gap was closing. We consoled the ghost, talked to her, soothed her with a little altar of trinkets and flowers. We informed the new buyers of her presence, and they assured us they'd care for Katie Elizabeth. We moved to California. Meanwhile, those new homeowners decided to turn the home into a bed and breakfast and began radically demolishing it, starting with the attic. So one stormy night a year later, as my husband and I read bedtime stories to our daughter, now in her canopy bed in a room with fairy murals, the winds heralded a message. The French doors blew open and the curtains billowed like a scene from Wuthering Heights. A frigid gust sliced across the room. Katie Elizabeth was home. We were her home. Not the mid-century California house, surely, but us, the living humans who'd adopted her. But much as we were happy she'd found us, it didn't really feel right. She was a lost little girl whose father's lamentations for her not to leave him kept her from moving on. So eventually we sought ghostly professional advice. We were informed to host a birthday party for Katie Elizabeth. We obliged. We donned sort of Victorian attire, very fancy. We had a cake that said, "Happy birthday, Katie Elizabeth." We arranged a collection of porcelain dolls. We invited some friends who didn't think we were crazy for believing in ghosts. And after honoring Katie Elizabeth with singing and speeches and some tears, my daughter instructed her spectral companion to go into the light of the candle flame, that the light was for her to go into the light. And she blew it out, and that was that. Katie Elizabeth went home. It's been 20 years since Katie Elizabeth lived with us, and we think of her often, especially since a psychic informed us Katie Elizabeth will return in the future as our daughter's little girl.
Oh.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think having lived in houses that had energy in them, that they are a part of it. And I love that this little girl knew who Katie Elizabeth was and that they grew up together pretty much.
I know. And I love that the parents supported it without promoting it, if that makes sense.
Right. They didn't make it weird. They didn't discount. They didn't, encourage their daughter to, "Oh, you're making that up. There's nobody there." I do think it's kind of shitty that the people immediately demolished the house after they said they'd take care of her, but
I know.
that was their home to do what they wanted to do with. What do you think? Because I know that you're more versed in this world than I am.
Well, I think it's just a lovely story of how we do need to treat these ghosts with respect, because she was stuck here and she wasn't home. I think the listener was right. Even though she had adopted them as her home, that wasn't her home. She was out of time and place, and she needed to go into the light. And I like the reminder that eventually she did go into the light, because that's something I think about a lot. When you hear ghost stories, you very, very rarely see like a Roman soldier from, 1 BC.
Right.
Because I think eventually everyone does cross over. It just takes some people longer than others.
Yeah, I don't know about her coming back as the little girl's daughter. That would be
Weird.
I'm not sure about that part of the story, but I love that they honored the spirit and the energy of Katie Elizabeth so beautifully.
I do too. On my other podcast, Denise, a listener sent us a story. I think about it a lot. She was brushing her little girl's hair. Her little girl was like 4 years old, and she said to her mother, "Do you remember me, Mama?" And she said, "Yeah, of course I remember you. Like, you're sitting right here, I'm brushing your hair." And she said,
Mhm.
No, do you remember me from when you were little? And she described what the little girl looked like when the mom was little. And the little girl described, like, what the games they would play. It was her imaginary friend, Denise.
Oh.
And she said, "I loved playing with you, but then God told me you were too old for imaginary friends and I had to return back to heaven. And I said I would miss you." And she said that God came up to her later and said, "She's getting ready to have a child. Do you want to be her daughter?" And then she said, "God went bloop to your belly and I am your daughter."
Oh my.
Yeah. The little girl described furniture from the grandparents' house where the listener grew up.
And would have no
Had no way of
concept of.
knowing that. And they would play hide and seek in this one cabinet. And she talked about how she always wore her hair in these braids with these ribbons, and that's how she saw her imaginary friend.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know.
Kids are so perceptive.
I know. Wide open. All right, we're moving on from
Okay.
a lovely ghost story and a successful spirit rescue to a black-eyed kid story, because why not?
Right. Why not? Let's get in the spirit of the season here. This one starts out with, I woke up to my dog, Lucy, barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. Sounds a bit silly, but it's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured it should work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I'd never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped towards me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerisms changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I'd been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole, and outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it in long, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and thin-looking olive-colored pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it was identical to the one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled, nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. Those kids had no indicators I was at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that's when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or dark, dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother's worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I'd never been one to believe in these things. As a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I'd written off many a ghost story from friends and family members eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I didn't answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door, my dog Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first, she seemed polite. When I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If you want to do that, we would have broken in. I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't a physical pulling as much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know that reading about them and that black-eyed kids can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it, that this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread of when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise.
Ooh.
Mm.
Those things are no joke, and nobody knows what they are. And it's not really true that they can't hurt you, because I've done a lot of research into these things, and I've come across a couple of stories of people who have let them in, and they don't hurt you, but bad things happen to you after that.
But they can't come in unless you invite them in.
Right.
Well, that's a good rule.
It is, which makes people think they're like vampires, but maybe it's like an energy vampire to the extreme, and they just feed off the fear.
Is there anything about them randomly showing up, or has there been any correlation between people going through other things in their life when they do show up?
Yes. And there is some thinking that there is a correlation between that.
Okay.
Going through grief or financial struggles or a health crisis.
So dark times.
Yes.
So similar to what we talked about in last week's episode about the Ouija board, where they might be just waiting in the wings for someone who is a little more vulnerable at the time.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you look at this stuff, you'll see, and again, this is why I like to research this stuff, because it keeps me mindful and informed about how important it is to really be honest and authentic with yourself, work through your own stuff so that you can keep your vibrations as positive as possible.
And the dog was a big part of the story.
Yeah.
Because I always think pay attention to what the animals are doing, because they know on a level that we don't.
I was just talking about this. I taught a psychic protection class last week, and I was talking about how my next door neighbor had that really scary entity in their home like 10 years ago. Do you remember that? I've talked about it.
Yeah.
And they moved into that house right after they had a really bad family loss. A member had died unexpectedly. Their marriage wasn't doing so great, and they were having some money worries as well. And I just find it interesting that you do see that correlation, which is why it's so important to, really work on not pushing all of that sadness or grief down, working through it so that you can be protected from this stuff.
Right.
Now, have you ever heard of the Dark Watchers, Denise?
No.
There's this legend that there are these giant shadow-like beings that haunt or protect a mountainous area in California. So imagine that you're hiking in the mountains in California, and it's very quiet and serene, and the sun is just slowly setting over the mountain. It's very calm and beautiful, and yet you can't shake this feeling of being watched. Was that a twig snapping or someone walking behind you? Is that a shadow leering over you, or just the last rays of the setting sun? Maybe, possibly, you've just encountered the Dark Watchers. Legends about these overly observant shadow beings date back 300 years. The Santa Lucia Mountains along the California coast are allegedly home to a group of shadowy beings who appear around twilight. In the 1700s, Spanish explorers told stories of encountering these Dark Watchers. They described seeing these beings who ranged in height from 7 feet to 15 feet. They're always dressed head to toe in flowing black robes and wear wide-brimmed hats. Some report seeing them with large walking sticks. They're always spotted at or near the top of the mountain, casting a large shadow over the range as they survey the land and people before them. Some people say these are predatory entities, while others say they are protectors of the land. Mysterious Universe writes about a witness account from 2011. And this person writes, "Many years ago, I was with a friend driving when my friend's car broke down. It was dusk and there was no way we were going to make it out before it was pitch black. Instead of chancing getting lost or hurt in the dark, we decided to sleep in the car and set out in the morning to get help to tow the car. This was way before cell phones. As we were killing time in the pitch black now, we started to distinctly see what looked like black shadows, evenly distributed, completely encircling us. Time passed, but they never moved. And though we walked around the car and got in and out of the car to see if what we were seeing was some sort of optical illusion, we couldn't explain or discredit what we were seeing. To this day, it racks my brain. And here's another account from a woman named Elizabeth. She says, I remember one day my friend and I were coming back from Los Angeles. I saw something at a distance down at the end of the mountain. It was a really big human figure, but it wasn't. It had a black cape, kind of like the Grim Reaper, and it was leaning over holding onto a staff. It was in the daytime too, so I could identify it wasn't a person. My friend saw it too. I asked her what she saw without giving her any details, and she described exactly what I was seeing. Another witness said he waved at a dark watcher and the shadowy being waved back. Now, skeptics say these sightings are either a trick of the light or connected to infrared sound that affects us, making us see hallucinations and feel as though we're being watched. But it is odd that these sightings only occur along this mountain range. So, if it were just the sun setting, wouldn't you see these shadowy beings over lots of different mountain ranges across the world?
Yes. And I remember long way back, we did the show on the hidden folks and all the energies that are in nature that we might not see in this ordinary reality, but they're in non-ordinary reality, which is just, kind of the holograph of what we're living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my feeling, is that these are beings that are very connected to that land. But there's nothing you shared was that they just watched. They didn't try to scare anyone. They didn't.
Right.
If they waved back, that's a good sign.
That's true.
So it doesn't feel like it's dark or scary. My gut feeling is that they're connected with the land and they're protecting it and making sure that, there's no ill intent. Did you ever come across anything scary with them?
No, not really. It's just the feeling people get, that creepy feeling of being watched, and it's almost like a warning, like stay away. But they've never done anything bad. It's not like they're shouting from the top of the mountain, "Get out."
Right. Or causing someone to trip, or,
Right.
that they're losing themselves on a trail somewhere and can't get back. And, the fact that if you've ever been in those mountains at night, it's dark. It's dark, dark, because there isn't any light pollution. So that would be another whole aspect of it that you have to keep in mind.
You see a dark watcher than a black-eyed kid, though.
Oh, yeah, if I had to choose. And that is a really you've felt that in the woods before.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
distinct feeling that is it an animal? Is it a being? Is there something watching you? But to me, it feels different if it's an animal than if it's an energy that I can't see with my human eye.
Yes, I agree. It's an unsettling feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our next one, this was emailed by a listener. About 8 years ago, I was watching TV with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, in the basement of his home. It was a lighthearted comedy, nothing scary, but I couldn't shake the creepy feeling of being watched. It was so intense, eyes drilling into the back of my head, and I was so uncomfortable that I kept looking behind me. My boyfriend noticed and asked what I was doing, and I told him what I was feeling. He didn't tell me at the time, but he felt it then too, and had been for a couple of weeks. This happened on 2 occasions. He also had a friend that would occasionally stay the night on the couch in this basement, but this friend stopped because he felt like somebody was watching him. All 3 of us felt the stare coming from the same location. One night I went to sleep in the bedroom in this basement, and I woke in the middle of the night because it felt like someone was staring at me from the cracked open door. Ooh, I hate that feeling. I turned to see an elongated shadow staring at me from the crack in the doorway. The figure was very tall and not quite right, like a human, but much taller. Their stare is still the scariest thing I've felt to this day. It felt so malicious, full of ill intent, and just so wrong. I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I could move. After this occurrence with my boyfriend, without telling anyone, said prayers around the room and hung a cross in the basement, and all 3 of us stopped having experiences at the same time. This incident creeped me out so much that I slept with the lights on for weeks and have 2 crosses in my bedroom. The other odd thing is after this experience, I started to be able to sense spirits and receive messages, which I've never been able to do before. I'm not entirely sure about the connection, but felt it was worth mentioning. Again, being stared at.
I
Not a big
know.
fan.
Not a big fan. What do you think shadow people are?
I don't know, but I do know personal experience, and I asked a group of people this the other night, and they said the same thing, that they've been sensing more shadows around, more energy around, more peripheral vision, more out of the corner of your eye kind of stuff. So this, though, feels like it was like a one unique. They usually move really fast, the
Yeah.
ones that I'm talking about. This one feels like it was more um, solid is a weird way to describe a shadow, but
That's how people describe shadow people.
more solid.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now, what you're describing, I have seen those things, and I don't think they're beings or entities. I think they're residues of our own stress.
oh,
Whenever I'm like stressed or I'm not sleeping or I'm worried about something, I'll see those little flickers, those little things. And I think it's like stuff coming off my aura as I'm working through whatever I'm stressed about.
oh, I like that.
But there are other reports of people seeing these fully formed shadowy beings. They're always in the doorway, it seems to be, just staring at them. And just like the Dark Watchers, they don't do anything, but they just leave you really scared and unsettled. I don't know about the connection with her opening up her intuition. I don't know if did it open before and that's why she was able to see this, or did it open after this thing visited her?
Because from what she said, the other 2 people only felt it. They didn't see anything.
Right. Or maybe seeing this thing made her realize, oh, there is something to this invisible world we're all existing in.
Good
And
point.
that let the last residue of doubt drop from her third eye. I don't know.
Right. And the fact that she said it felt so malicious and full of ill intent, and that was just off.
Yeah, that's
I think,
awful.
yeah.
All right, what is a spooky show, Denise, without a story of exorcisms?
No.
So this story happened in Brookfield, Connecticut, and I actually grew up in Danbury, Connecticut, which is about 8 minutes away. So I moved to Danbury shortly after this occurred, and people were still talking about it. It was a big story in that neck of the woods. They've made some movies and documentaries about this story, but I don't know if you've heard of this. So sit back and buckle up, Buttercup. This one's scary. Cheyenne Johnson was living a normal, ordinary life in Brookfield, Connecticut in the early 1980s. He was engaged to the love of his life, Debbie. He had a good job and life was going well until they rented a new home together in the cozy, historic Brookfield of 1981. It was a small yellow home with green shutters set in the woods off Old Hawesville Road. On the day they moved in, Debbie's younger brother, David, saw the ghost of a man. He said his skin was burned and black-looking, and he was barefoot. David described him as having feet like a deer. So this man looked as though he had been charcoaled, grilled. Like his
Mm-hmm.
skin was completely burned, and he had hoofs for feet.
Oh.
Yeah. Then he started having nightmares. He'd wake up with unexplained scratches, cuts, and bruises on his face and body. So 2 weeks later, his parents called Ed and Lorraine Warren. By this time, the 12-year-old boy was screaming in pain, shouting obscenities, pushing away unseen hands that he said were trying to choke him. Now, Ed and Lorraine Warren, if you haven't heard of them, they had a 50-year career together fighting demons. Ed was a self-taught demonologist. Lorraine was a clairvoyant medium. Together, the married couple worked on several famous cases, such as the Amityville Horror, the Bridgeport Poltergeist, and all of the stories behind the Conjuring movies. Their life's mission was to prove the existence of good and evil. Along the way, they pioneered many techniques still used in the field today, including audio and visual recording devices, advanced electromagnetic devices, and even produced their own television show. David's mom told the Warrens, "He's attacked me quite a lot. He spit at me, kicked me, squeezed me in the bust. He attacked his grandmother with a knife. The family took to sleeping during the day and staying awake at night when it would take all of their strength to keep him on the bed. By this time, the family knew this wasn't an ordinary ghost and be calling this thing the beast. The Warrens noticed there are warning signs when the beast is about to take possession of David. They said his head lowers to his chest and then he slowly lifts it. When he does, his features have contorted into a snarl, and there's nothing to be seen but the whites of his eyes. And then he laughs, a hideous laugh. When Ed interviewed the boy, Lorraine says she saw a black, misty form next to him. Soon the child was complaining that hands were choking him. He said he had the feeling he was being hit. The family also reported toys moving on their own, chairs soaring through the air, dodging books thrown at them by unseen hands, and seeing plates levitate in the air. They even pointed to a sticky circle on the ceiling they said appeared after a cake floated up to the ceiling, leaving its residue as a sign. His sister Debbie was clawed by a mysterious green hand that appeared rising from the floor before attacking her in her bed at night. She also says that she saw the face of the beast. She says, "I saw a face with jagged teeth and coal-black eyes. It had horns and pointed ears. Flashing lights appeared on the wall. David would often quote from the Bible and Paradise Lost. A priest from St. Joseph's Church was brought in to perform a deliverance and say a mass in the home. Ed and Lorraine Warren brought a group of priests, and together they held 3 lesser exorcisms where they said David levitated, shouted swear words, stopped breathing, and even demonstrated precognition, predicting the murder that Cheyenne Johnson would go on to commit. We'll get to that in a minute. Lorraine later said, "We know there were 43 demons in the boy. We demanded names, and David gave us 43. When the reporter Lynn Darling called the Bishop of Bridgeport to confirm what the Warrens said, that 6 priests in total were brought in to perform exorcisms, he declined to comment. The director of communications for the diocese said, "The policy is not to speak to the press. It would be true of any situation of a pastoral nature. We want to uphold the dignity of the individual person. When you're talking about exorcism, you're talking about the church confronting the evil spirit, the evil one. You're talking about doing battle in the name of the church." He also said that one of the reasons a formal exorcism had not been authorized for the boy is because the family had not consented to the psychological test that the church considers necessary. "It's a delicate situation," Father Greco said. "In cases of this nature, you don't presume anything. Through prayers and observation, you make a decision. Lots of things can be explained through psychology, and yet we can't explain everything rationally. We're looking for a balance. These things do exist. These things do happen, but not that often." So the boy's mom, Judy, she says that she did take her son to a psychiatrist in Bridgeport who charged her $75 an hour, and she couldn't afford the rest of the testing that the church required. She said it's up to the church officials to arrange the psychological testing that will satisfy their requirements. Now, one night after Cheyenne had enough of seeing his fiance's little brother being terrorized, he stood up and challenged the demon to take him on instead of the little boy. That's a no-no, everyone. At first, nothing happened, but soon Cheyenne started acting strangely too. In church later that week, Cheyenne suddenly stood up and yelled, "Son of a bitch, get me out of here," before leaving. Okay, personally, I just have to say, Denise, that would be kind of funny to see in church.
Yes, it would.
I'm sorry. I just had to interject that. On February 16th, Cheyenne called in sick to his job as a tree surgeon for the Wright Tree Service, claiming a sore throat. He'd been acting and feeling strangely. Debbie later testified that she heard 2 distinct voices coming out of Cheyenne's mouth and heard him growl several times that day. He went to visit his fiancée Debbie where she worked at the Brookfield boarding kennel. The owner of the kennel, Alan Bono, was there too. He'd just moved to Brookfield about 6 months before. He'd lived in Australia for years and had arrived in Connecticut to help his sister manage the kennels. So Bono invited the couple to join him for lunch at a local bar called the Mug and Munch. Bono was drinking a lot of wine, while Debbie and Cheyenne sipped their solitary glasses of red wine and listened to Bono's tales of adventure. When they returned to the kennels, Cheyenne helped Bono fix his stereo, and later Bono invited Debbie and some of the other kennel workers to his apartment up above the kennels. As they listened to music, Bono became upset that it was too loud and began punching his fist into his other hand. Debbie ushered everyone out of the apartment, but Bono held on to one of the girls. Now Cheyenne left for his car, and another girl named Wanda said that when he returned, she says that she saw something flash at his side and heard him growl like an animal. Before anyone knew what happened, Bono lay dead on the ground. It was the first murder in Brookfield's history. So on February 17th, 1981, Cheyenne was arrested for the fatal stabbing of Bono. His case is the only one in recent American history to use the devil made me do it defense. He was sentenced to 20 years. In prison, he received his GED, started college. He married Debbie, and he was released just 5 years into his 20-year sentence for exemplary behavior. To this day, Cheyenne and Debbie are married, and Cheyenne has exhibited no other violent behaviors. However, I could not find any updated information on what happened to the little boy David. I find it weird, Denise, that he committed a murder, and he got 20 years, so that's second-degree murder. It's not like he planned to do it that day. But to only serve 5 years, it just makes me wonder if other stuff came out that wasn't made public. Like, did he act out in the prison?
Well, that was my thought, too. Why did they let him out after 5 years? Murder, they don't usually let murderers out after 5 years unless something has changed exponentially with evidence or with, yes, he behaved himself and he got his GED and started college and did everything he was supposed to do, but still.
I've seen like second-degree murderers, at least where I live, I've seen them get out in 10 years.
Okay.
I have never seen 5 years.
No.
That strikes, not like that's the most compelling part of the story. Clearly it's not, but wow.
Right. And when you think about $75 an hour in 1981,
I know.
that was a lot of money.
A lot of money. Like I said, there's been movies made with this. I think Kevin Bacon starred in the TV movie made about this story. There's been documentaries made on this, and you can see like a lot of people testified that he was a good guy, and they did hear this growl, and they did see this complete change in his behavior. And all these years later, no one has changed their story.
Okay. And no one has ever brought up the little boy again, where it all started.
Right. So there's Debbie, the little boy, and then I think there's like one or two other brothers. And one of the brothers has a construction business in town, and he is trying to sue and say that it was all made up. But the reporter got him to admit that he's doing that mainly because the rumors around his family in this case is hurting his business. Like
Which makes
people
sense.
don't want to hire someone connected to this story.
Right.
So I don't know.
Oh my goodness. It's a lot to think about.
I know, it's scary.
Okay, now there's 2 terrifying encounters of alien abductions. Oh, okay. Tom Kaiser in the Baltimore Sun wrote about a woman he named Leah, who's had recurring nightmares of being alone in a small gray room where she hears a voice saying, "Don't move or you might be hurt." She remembers seeing faces of terrifying non-human beings holding syringes near her as she lies on an examining table, and then, as always, she would awake screaming. As a child and teen, her mom would say, "Oh, stop watching scary stuff on TV. It's just a nightmare. Go back to bed." But the nightmares continued into adulthood. Now in her 20s, Leah describes herself as an average person. She describes how she was when she was a child. She and her sister heard a humming sound like a swarm of bees when they were playing outside one late afternoon. The sun was just beginning to settle down for the day when they saw a silver disc-shaped object travel across the treetops near their apartment building. They ran inside and told their parents. They even drew pictures of it, but their parents didn't believe them. Years later, when they were sleeping at their grandparents' house, Leah describes laying in bed one night when an orb of light about the size of a tennis ball came sailing in through the open bedroom window, and then another and another. She counted about 20 orbs of light in all. Her sister saw it too, and they both screamed. The balls of light disappeared when the adults rushed in. Once again, nobody believed them. As an adult, Leah was in a bookstore when she saw Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, describing his own experience with alien abductions. On the cover are images of gray aliens. Leah got excited and exclaimed, "That's them. Those are the beings I see in my nightmares."
Ooh.
And so there's another one as well along this, and then I want to share something. In New York City on the 30th November in 1989 at 3 o'clock in the morning, a married mom of two was seen emerging from an apartment building 12 stories above the ground, accompanied by 3 small extraterrestrials just floating on her back through the night sky over the Manhattan skyline. She was witnessed by several people, including a U.S. diplomat and his security team, suspended within a blue beam of light. Witnesses watched as Linda and these 3 small beings were lifted into a large reddish-orange glowing UFO, which then moved off and flew over the Brooklyn Bridge. When she returned, writer Bud Hopkins said she had an implant in her nose, which later appeared in an X-ray. Within weeks, however, the implant in her nose seemingly disappeared without a trace. Linda said later of the event, "If I was hallucinating, then the witnesses saw my hallucination. That sounds crazier than the whole abduction phenomenon." So, UFOs and alien beings, do I believe there's something more than us out there? Yes, I think it's a little too egoic to think we're all there is in the vast universe. But this came up, the ancestral thing that I'm doing, and someone brought up that, and I don't know anything about this, maybe you do, that when people have an abduction in their family, we were talking about how family trauma gets passed down, and this person brought up that if there's been a family alien abduction or encounter, that it tends to stay in families and show up. So that could be a trauma that was passed down, and they'll show up later in a generational line. I
Yeah, you
hadn't heard
see that.
anything about that.
No, you see that a lot, and it makes you wonder, in these alien abduction cases, like Whitney Strieber, he wrote about his experience in his cabin up in upstate New York in his book Communion, and he wrote it as a terrifying experience. As he got older and had time to reflect on it, he realized that they didn't hurt him.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Travis, the alien. That's my favorite alien abduction story in Arizona. He was out there logging with his friends and disappeared for almost 2 weeks and came back super emaciated, a beard. I mean, his other logging buddies were about to be arrested for his murder, even though they didn't have a body. I mean, I think that's one of the best documented cases. But this Linda Napolitano one is pretty well documented too. But yeah, what they think is that they're researching them, some people think they're trying to unravel stuff in our DNA to help us, like to fix things that are inherited in our DNA line genetically.
Mm-hmm.
Other people think they're just observing and researching for purposes we don't understand.
Oh.
But it's just interesting to research.
And if there is a story in your family line, maybe you could dig a little deeper into that and see if there's a connection.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about ghosts, black-eyed kids, alien abductions, exorcisms. We've got to talk about vampires, right?
How can we not?
How can we not? Have you heard of the Casket Girls of New Orleans?
I have not.
Okay. Get ready for this one. When the colony of New Orleans was first being populated, France sent a ship of women over in 1728 to help settle the new colony. Some reports say this was a ship of nuns. Others say they were prostitutes. However, of the 800 women in total who were sent to the colony, only one was arrested for prostitution. Regardless, the women were nicknamed the Casket Girls because they each carried their belongings in casket-shaped suitcases. Some legends say these pale-skinned girls were vampires, while others believed they smuggled vampires into New Orleans in these caskets. These caskets were allegedly stored in a convent attic located in the French Quarter. It's said that these caskets remain in this attic to this day behind attic windows that are nailed shut with nails that were blessed by the Pope. And yes, people, that part of the story is true. I found an article on exemplar.com which said, in 1978, two amateur reporters demanded that the convent's priest let them in to see these coffins. The priest, of course, denied their entrance, so one night these two men climbed over a wall with their recording equipment and set up their workstation. The next morning, the reporters' equipment was found strewn about on the street outside, and there on the convent's front step were found the almost decapitated bodies of these two men. 80% of their blood was gone. To this day, this unsolved crime baffles investigators. However, most residents laugh this story off as just another scary tale out of New Orleans. The archivist of the Archdiocese of New Orleans said there's nothing on the third floor of the old Ursuline convent beside archival records and other storage items. Still, it makes you wonder, if there is so much legend and lore around this third floor, why not just unlock it and at least let a historian or a tour guide see it? You know?
Right.
It's weird. Then there's an even weirder story of the two brothers who arrive in New Orleans during the Great Depression. John and Wayne Carter were two apparently normal brothers working on the docks until one morning in 1932, when a young woman runs up to an officer with a wild tale. Covered in blood, with her wrist slit, the woman said she had been tied up and held by the two brothers who were drinking her blood. Police rushed to the home of the brothers and found 4 others tied up, barely alive, with their wrists also bleeding and bandaged. Some sources say police also found over a dozen deceased bodies in the home. Since the brothers weren't home, the police decided to wait for them. They positioned all their strongest officers inside and outside the home. Reports indicate that the brothers weren't big men, both averaging around 5'6" and weighing no more than 160 pounds. However, some legends say the two brothers somehow managed to overtake every officer before leaping off the top floor balcony and landing safely on their feet. Officers said they took off running faster than they'd ever seen a human run. The brothers were arrested at the docks the next day. Other stories say the men were arrested that very day, but it took over 8 officers to subdue them. They were tried and hung for murder. However, when the bodies were later exhumed to see if they were indeed vampires, townspeople were shocked to discover the coffins were empty. To this day, residents of the French Quarter report seeing the brothers. An apartment owner in the building that used to be the Carter residence said he heard 2 men whispering on the 3rd floor balcony, who jumped from the balcony when they realized they were seen and sprinted off into the night.
Oh,
What do you think about that?
I think that New Orleans has such a rich history. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. The architecture alone makes it worth going. It's incredible, and the lore and everything about it. I don't know about the vampire thing. I don't. Do I think that there are records? Yes. Do I? I don't know. You know how much of a practical, grounded as much as I live in the woo-woo world, I'm really pretty grounded and practical, and that stuff's a little hard for me to. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they were serial killers.
Oh, now that makes more sense to me.
Yeah. And I think, maybe the stories got exaggerated because New Orleans is New Orleans.
Right.
I was going to do research for a spooky episode on the 7 gates to hell or something like that in New Orleans. Have you heard of that?
I have, yes.
Yeah, that kind of spooked me out too much. And I was like, I'd rather just dabble in a story here and there than.
Yes. Yeah, we don't need to really open up those gates, do we?
No, no. New Orleans, I've never been. I do want to go, but I want to go like during June or July. And I
Mhm.
know I'll be hot as anything, and I know it's not the best time to go, but I don't want to go during spooky season, and I don't want to go during Mardi Gras, too many crowds.
Exactly.
But I do enjoy reading all of these stories and legends and hearing them. So I believe in vampires? No, I do not. Do I believe in energy vampires? Yes, I do. Do I believe in serial killers? Yeah. So I think that what we do is worse than, kind of what any alien or black-eyed kid can do. You know what I mean?
Yes, how we treat each other.
Yeah.
And as far as the graves being empty, did someone dig them up because they thought they were something more, or were they grave robbers? Or there might be a real a practical reason why the graves were empty.
Sure.
There's always an
Sure.
answer.
Tell yourself that when you're falling asleep tonight. I'll tell you, I really did research the Casket Girls of New Orleans, and there is, like, you'll find an article here or there, but you can't back it up with like a primary source. There are primary sources that talk about the Pope blessing those nails that nailed the windows shut on that 3rd story of the convent. And I just find that interesting.
Some reading that I'm doing right now on that time period and how the power of the Catholic faith from France during that timeline. It's really, really interesting stuff.
It really is. We on a Psychic Teachers, we just did a spooky episode on Hauska Castle, which is considered to be a portal to hell. And when I was researching that, I somehow went down this whole other little path that led me to Napoleon. And he supposedly talked to this man that other people saw. There's eyewitness testimony accounts from really high up military personnel who had big reputations to protect. But they talked about Napoleon being super busy or just, in the throes of trying to build France into what he was trying to do, and still always taking a meeting with what they called the Red Man. And he was always dressed in a red suit. And he
Oh,
came to Napoleon and said, we've given you your 3 chances. And if you don't bring France to a place of peace, if you don't do what we told you to do and surrender, we will not save you. And soon after that, he was captured. And so I was like, who's this Red Man? So I started researching that. And he has appeared to members of French royalty several times throughout history.
wow.
But I couldn't find a lot on it, like not enough to do a whole show.
Right.
So I'd like to figure that out. But there's just weird stuff out there.
I think that's one of the things that we both love digging around and trying to find those little stories and the clips and the things that all pull it all together.
I know.
It's fun.
Just things to back it up. Like that one story I read about the 2 reporters jumping over the convent fence and being found decapitated.
Yes.
That's a legend. I could not find anything to back that up. It's a good story. Well, not a good story, but you know what I mean. It's a if you're a tour guide, it's an interesting story to tell, but I couldn't find anything to back it up.
Right.
But I enjoy when I can find weird stuff and then back it up with some evidence.
Yes. Very, very much so.
Well, we hope everyone has a wonderful Halloween. Do you have plans for Halloween, Denise? Are you getting dressed
No.
up? Going out,
Goodness,
ringing
no.
doorbells?
Nope. Low key, under the wire. Just something different this time for this holiday.
You gonna watch the spooky show?
Oh, goodness, no.
Oh,
No.
come on.
No.
I'm gonna send you at least one spooky documentary and just maybe you'll consider watching it and get into the thrill of the
There
season.
really is, though. I can validate that, they always say the veils are thinner. Do something nice to connect with your people in spirit, because they're right. It's really, really nice. And we could go into all the rituals of set a plate and Night of the Dead and Hallows Eve and all of those things that are around Halloween. But there really is something to be said if you want to connect with your people or your loved ones in spirit a little bit more. They do seem a little bit closer during that time frame.
That is true. And that is a great point. It's a wonderful time to tell their stories, to honor them, to make a donation in their honor, to set up an altar, to just send out a message to them, to ask for a sign.
Mm-hmm.
But something else I find a little spooky, Denise, the day after Halloween is All Souls Day. And then we have, in my faith, a day where we just celebrate the angels. And I find
Right.
it interesting that the church chose to put those right smack dab after Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep, yep,
Balance.
yep.
Everything in balance. Well, we hope you guys have enjoyed this show. Have a great week. We hope you have a wonderful Halloween filled with lots of spooky tales and times and good candy. Remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.